Hello, everyone. My name is Kinga Nolan, and we are back today with Skye, and she is going to be talking to us today about VR desiccants and some pre-harvest aids. Hi, Skye. How's it going today?
Hey Kinga, not bad.
Good. Well, I know this is a pretty timely topic. I know in Southern Alberta, guys are already getting out there starting to harvest. And I know you and I were talking, and I've never actually heard of variable rate desiccants. So I'm really excited to hear about what you have to share with us today. But I guess to kick things off, why should our customers be using desiccants? What are some of the kind of objectives that we're trying to obtain with that?
Sure, yeah. I would say there's honestly two main goals that I hear from growers when we're planning these applications. The first one that I think of is pre-harvest weed control. So, I mean, some lentil fields especially get dirty. So this is our chance to clean those up a little bit while preparing for harvest. That's just one example, though. And the other goal that you hear about the most is just drying down green plant material so that you can harvest the crop. So just harvest prep in general. So that can still include like drying down green weeds, but as well drying down green parts of the crop, especially with indeterminate crops like lentils is another example, just because it is indeterminate. So there's green parts still. So yeah, just bringing the crop in and sometimes weed control.
Yeah, no, definitely that makes sense. So if I want to apply a desiccant, what kind of products am I looking at exactly?
Yeah, there's lots of options actually. I guess I would say it's going to depend on your crop type because that'll depend what products are actually registered for that crop, as well as your goals, like we were talking about. If you were trying to achieve pre-harvest weed control more so, you would lead to a product more like glyphosate. Whereas if you were leaning more to a desiccant, there's products more like Reglone or Dicot products. The other thing I would consider is how fast you want the crop to dry down so that you can get out there to harvest, because there is different intervals after you spray different products to when you can harvest the crop. So those would be the three main things. But yeah, like I said, glyphosate more geared towards that pre-harvest weed control, and products more like Reglone and Dicot are geared more towards desiccating the actual crop. So there's going to be some situations where you also don't want to use glyphosate, like if you are saving your crop for seed, or seed growers, for example, they are a little bit strapped. They don't want to use that product. As well as there's some products like heat, just as an example, where you want a tank mix with glyphosate. So there's just different options out there, but just checking the labels of different products. Another good resource to help determine what products to use is the most provinces put out a crop protection guide. So I know Saskatchewan has one. So they actually have tables in there with the different products you can use as a pre-harvest aid or a desiccant and what crops they're registered on. But other than that, I would just say consult your potential grain buyers just to make sure that products are um, safe to use as a pre-harvest aid and there's not going to be market access issues. Just before you pick something, you don't want to pick the wrong one.
No, that's a great point.
Mhm.
I know like you mentioned things like like intervals and then mixes and stuff like that. But when I'm are there any things I should keep in mind when I decide to apply some of these pre-harvest aids?
Yeah, for sure. I guess you mentioned intervals, so we can start with that.
Sure.
Um, yeah, so different products are going to have a different time when you can get in the field after you sprayed them. So the common ones I would say are glyphosate, 7 to 14 days, so you can get out to the field and harvest. If we're talking about um, Dicot or a Reglone product, that's 4 to 7 days, so you can get out there. And then there's other products that can be even quicker, like heat, for example, can be 3 days, depending. So yeah, different goals there when you're picking different products. So the other thing I would say to consider, we'll talk about Reglone here for an example. It's a
Sure.
contact herbicide, which is different than the others. So we want to use a lot of water. This is a conversation that I have with growers all the time. Actually, it
Follow
was
the
funny.
label.
Yes, and it was funny. One grower was joking with me about it, like they just keep raising the water needed every year on that product in the crop protection guide. And It might be true, but I think now they recommend anywhere from 24 to 58 US gallons an acre
Okay,
with
wow.
products like Raglan. So yeah,
Let's
a
do
lot. So, but there is benefit to that. Like it's a contact herbicide. We want to get that coverage. So it's important to stay on label and make sure we're using the right rates. Um, I guess on the opposite end of things, if we're talking about glyphosate, it's also important to note that it might take some time to dry down. It's not the quickest option. And it's gonna depend on environmental conditions too, how fast the crop's gonna senesce after it's been sprayed. So just to keep that in mind. I guess when we're talking about that too, staging is really important. We can get into that more later, but we don't want to be too early because we can potentially reduce our yield and our quality, as well as run into issues with residues. So, yeah, staging is really important to kind of be there so we're not losing yield and quality, but also making sure that we're not going to have residues on our seeds. So, yeah. And I guess just a plug, these products are not going to speed up the maturity of your crops, like green
Right.
crops. We're here to dry them down. So we got to make sure we're using them as such. And yeah, just make sure what people know they're here for.
Yeah. Use them for the right reason, right?
Yes, exactly.
And so you've mentioned a lot that I kind of got me thinking here. So I know at the kind of a little bit earlier on, you mentioned like these indeterminate crops, like say for example, like your lentils, your peas, where you kind of have to spray them. But when would you generally like use a desiccant on? Like what kinds of crops, I should say, would you use a desiccant on?
Kinds of crops. There's actually lots of options. So you had it right there. Like our first ones and most commonly sprayed are going to be our indeterminate crops. So here, lentils are generally sprayed prior to harvest. In most situations, honestly. Chickpeas are another one where they're an indeterminate crop, so they're often desiccated in the southern prairies. When we start talking about other crops, so field peas included, I think they're technically an indeterminate crop as well. But when we're also talking about pod shatter resistant canola or cereals, those crops can be desiccated as well. I would say in this area, we're pretty dry, and growers would typically let those crops come in on their own
Yeah.
because eventually they will. For the most part, it's usually pretty hot late in the growing season, and these applications are pretty costly. So if we could save money on that, sometimes that's what our main goal is. But there is definitely times where I would say when growers would want to spray them, like if they want to generally speed up harvest and make harvest more timely, if crops are just taking too long to mature and we want to get them in, or say fields are super weedy and we want to get the benefit from that pre-harvest weed control. So there is options, or I guess more so times when those crops would be sprayed as well. So
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, sounds like a wide variety of options, like from that standpoint. So
yes, definitely.
something else you mentioned was a little bit about like staging and how staging is really important. And we want to use it to kind of, like kill the plant and not just necessarily speed up the growth. So what is like the proper staging for a lot of the crops that you mentioned?
Yeah, maybe the best way to talk about this is I'll start with glyphosate timing, just because it's the same
Sure.
across all crops, which I know sounds a little weird, but when you're looking at the staging guides, it's less than 30% seed moisture that we're targeting, and that's meaning the least mature areas of the field, because we don't want to run into any residue issues if we're spraying when there's more moisture or more seed moisture. So what does 30% seed moisture look at? I'm assuming most people have that question. There are physiological stages that kind of match up to that you'll find on different guides if you're looking around. I'm just going to talk about lentils first, just because they are the most commonly desiccated crop in my area. So that's the one that people want to hear about the most. So when we're talking about lentil staging, we're going to look at the plant in thirds. So like the bottom third, middle third, and top third. So we want the bottom third, like pods are brown, seeds are brown and full size, and the plant's going to rattle actually, like when you shake it. And that's just because seeds are detached in the pods. So
Okay.
seeds are hard and they're not going to split open when you try in between your fingers. Once we get to that middle third, pods are still full size and seeds are showing 100% seed color change. So what that means is they can be anywhere from that light green to tan or brown, but they're not going to be that juicy green color. Seeds are firm full size. They're not juicy, but you can split them with your fingers. If you go like this, they'll split in two.
Versus
So
those bottom ones you can't split.
yeah, exactly. You got it. Then when we get to the top of the plant, they say it's 50 to 75% seed color change if you want to get technical. But what that's going to look like at that top third is the seeds are still going to be green in color for the most part. But they are fully formed and they're firm, but they are still going to be juicy and like they might be quite green still. So yeah, that's what lentils are like. The other one was chickpeas that I would say is pretty commonly desiccated here. So proper timing for that, plants are going to be yellow, pods are mature. So we're actually going to have seeds looking like their final color at this point. They call it the pod rattle stage, actually, where the seeds are still detached from the pods. So you'll shake it and it'll rattle. And that's kind of how you know. Field peas, that's another one. Sometimes you'll see desiccated. So again, looking at the plant in thirds. So the bottom, ripe, seeds attached, it's going to rattle. But then when you're looking at the top and the middle for peas, pods are going to be wrinkled, seeds are full size and firm, but they might still be slightly green.
Okay.
Other crops, cereals we can talk about. So that cereals aren't commonly desiccated as much in this area, but sometimes they might be. So glyphosate timing for cereals would correspond to hard dough or more mature to get that 30% or less seed moisture. So that's when your kernels are, they're firm, but when you push on them with your thumbnail, they'll leave a little indent, but the content, like you can still rip the kernel and contents are dry inside. So that's your hard dough staging. As for canola, 50 to 60% seed color change is what they say corresponds to that 30% seed moisture or less. So I guess just a little note on what seed color change is. That's when you're looking at only the main stem of the plant. And seed color change could be when seeds are dark, hard, or even just if they're green and have a little bit of speckling or mottling of the brown color. So, but you're only looking at the main stem when we talk about seed color change. That's just important to note because sometimes you're going to look at some guides and they're going to say percent brown seed, and that's just a little bit different because in those cases you're looking at the whole plant, where seed color change you're just looking at that main stem. So yeah, 50 to 60% seed color change. Bottom, obviously pods like completely black brown seeds are in there. Middle, we're going to see mostly brown seeds, but you might also have some of those green seeds with brown speckling. So that seed color change I was talking about. But the top will still be green, but you want your seeds to be firm. So when you roll them through your fingers, they don't squish super easy. So,
okay.
Yeah, those are the main ones. I would say like Reglan's also important to talk about just because it's used quite a bit here as a desiccant. Pulses staging is pretty much the same, where the lower pods they're brown and it's going to rattle when it's shaken. But for example, just a contrast, if you're going to put it on canola, obviously pod shatter varieties are more where that's appropriate. But the staging is actually 90% brown seed. So like I was saying, you're looking at the whole plant. So you want it dried down quite a bit more before you're going to put a product like that on. Mm-hmm. That was a lot, but
yeah, no, they're very thorough. I appreciate it. So, okay, we walked through this process here, and now I know what product I'm using. I know what stage that, I want to apply it at. But in terms of the actual application timing, what should I be considering?
Yeah, like once you get your stage down pat, I would say there's a couple products actually where there is an optimal time of day to spray. So Reglone, for example, it's activated right away by sunlight. So it's actually ideal to spray it in the evening. It's a contact herbicide, so then it's kind of giving it a chance to slightly spread from where the droplet contact point was. Obviously not a lot, but before it activates the next morning when the sun comes up and gets hot. So more even coverage can be seen, especially when you apply in the evening. So that's what I would target there. Opposite side of the spectrum, actually, so heat's also activated by sunlight, but it's actually recommended to spray heat during the heat of the day, just to get that best performance, sunny day. Yeah, those are the main ones.
Okay, no, that's helpful. So we've talked a lot about the kind of the whole agronomy side of things and actually going through and picking things out and applying. And this was my question we were having a conversation last week, but how does variable rate tie into desiccants?
Very good question. It's not something that's talked about a lot. It's not
No.
like VR fertility or even VR fungicide that's gaining or gaining traction now. But it's still the same general principles of VR. Like we want to optimize our product rates to the growth, the crop growth, and vegetation growth out in the field. So it's going to give us the opportunity to save on really expensive products in some cases, in certain areas of the fields where maybe the crops already began drying down or the stand is thinner. There's maybe not many green weeds, things like that. But there's also lusher areas of the field where the stands are thick. We could benefit from maybe even extra water in those areas or higher rates of product in situations where we have products with a minimum and maximum rate and the option to do that, or even just weed patches that you want to hit. So yeah, there's definitely opportunity to save some money with these applications, especially if we have goals in mind. Like I was saying with weeds, sometimes when we're looking at NDVI imagery, you might get a really green weed patch. So we can target those areas maybe with the higher rates, or even just to have those areas of the field on if there's hilltops, maybe, for example, that they're already drying down on their own. They don't need as much product or any product at all. So it's a field by field, zone by zone type thing, for what rate we would set and what we would do, but it gives us options. So I would say the biggest, or not the biggest, the most common question I get is, well, how do we vary the rates? Because it's not just your drill putting down different rates of products, right? So it's the same as VR fungicide, where we're varying our water volumes while staying on label. So it's going to depend on your product. So you might be limited to an on-off prescription if there's only one label rate, or just again, tossing Reglan as an example, because there's a option to do off, lower, high rate, or something in between. So yeah, just keeping our options open. And it's also going to depend on your equipment's capabilities. So definitely talk to your dealership and your tech and figure that out. But there's many options.
No, that's pretty neat. So in terms of actually creating a variable rate desiccant prescription, how does that work? So I know we have like a lot of tools here at Farmer's Edge to make VR maps, but do you want to walk us through specifically what that would look like for a desiccant?
Oh yeah, for sure. It's pretty similar process to when we're talking about VR fungicide. Like the first thing we want to do is ensure that our sprayer is capable of VR and that it's unlocked for VR. So if you're not sure, you can ask your tech or follow up with your dealership, because they should know and be able to help you out with that. But once we know that our sprayer is good to go, that's when we can start by identifying what fields we want to spray, and what goals we have with that, what's going on in these fields, what do we want to accomplish, and where can we maybe save some money in these different spots. Once we get that all figured out, we can go right to making the zone map. So the agronomist will make the map, and they go off satellite NDVI imagery, and they're going to use the most recent cloud-free image. We can't use any images with cloud in them. It skews the image way too much. So got to make sure that there's cloud-free days, which is nice because this time of year, like I know during VR fungicide season, we get lots of cloudy days in the summer, different rainy days, things like that can lead into some issues. But I've just been looking at imagery recently, and there's lots of new stuff. So it's good this time of year. We get some more clear skies and lots of good images we can use. So very helpful on that side of things. But once our maps are made, that's when it's time for the agronomist and the grower to review the maps together. So we'll go over what they look like, what's going on in different areas. And that's kind of when we decide what rate we want to use. And there's different tools that we can use to kind of decide this. Like obviously, grower knowledge of the field is going to be number one. We can also look at those NDVI images from Farm Command itself and compare different spots and what's going on. But I'll say it's no replacement to actually getting out to the field, especially when we're going to be determining spray timing, like staging and whatnot. But also you can go out and ground truth these maps and put rates on there based on what you're seeing in the field. So lots of flexibility there, and customization is key
Definitely.
with these kind of applications. So yeah, once we get everything approved, we're going to send the stuff off to the tech. So it's their job. They're going to build the application maps and send them right to the grower. So they're just converting them to make sure that they're going to work with your monitor.
Right.
And then most growers will get these sent over email or USB. Or some cases, we can actually send it right over the CAN plug. It just kind of depends
Oh,
what your
wow.
setup is. And if you're not sure, reach out to your tech and we'll help you out with that. But one thing I didn't say is we like it when you can give us more notice for these applications. I know it's hard trying to determine when to spray, and harvest is almost upon us right now. There's definitely growers going in the area on their early stuff or starting to desiccate anyways. So we like to get a week's notice if possible. With that being said, I know it's kind of go time now, so it doesn't hurt to ask. Reach out to your Farmers Edge representatives and we'll see what we can do for you. But with more notice, it definitely gives us more options for delivering those maps and making sure we got them to you on time. So yeah, that was a lot of information, but I'll just sum it up by saying there's going to be a few different things that the grower is going to get at the end of the day. So the first thing, a copy of that zone map that we made. So I usually give the growers a screenshot of the maps right from our zoning program. And why I like those is because it's going to show you the number of acres in each zone, as well as the percentage of each zone and how much it's taking up of the whole field. Because that might help with some of those decisions like, oh, do I want to turn off 50% of my field or have it at the low rate? Well, maybe I do, like we can start looking at it like that in more of a bigger picture. The next thing you're going to get is an as prescribed map. So it's just a PDF map, but it's essentially showing you where each rate is prescribed across the field. And so you can see it kind of on a list view, but also on the map. So that's really handy, especially to have in the cab with you or refer back to when you're looking at these applications. But I love those because it's going to have your products. So your average or the rate and water volume for each zone, but also the averages and totals. So it kind of helps with planning a little bit as well, having those in advance. And then lastly, and probably most importantly, the prescription that's in your sprayer. So, yeah.
Definitely. So if I'm watching this right now and I'm like, holy smokes, I want to try VR Desiccant right now to start my harvest next week, how do I get a prescription?
Yeah, reach out to any of your Farmers Edge representatives, your agronomist, your tech, your account manager, and we'll get the process started and get you in touch with the right person. We're going to ask you for some required information, though. So if you have this ready, it'll make the process way smoother. But we're going to ask you, like, what's your estimated spray date? Just so we know what is our timeline. We need to get you these maps. Let's go. What field do you want to spray? And as well, what crop type? Obviously, like, the agronomist is going to look up your product, make sure you're on label, everything's good to go. But if we have what crop type, your product, and if you know what label rates you want to use, then that speeds it along as well, especially if there's a couple options for that crop type. Another one, water volume. This might be the average you want, or if it's an on-off map, what you want to use, or even just a range of what you're comfortable with. For an example, if we're doing like a low-high map, you might be thinking, okay, this is what we're going to use. It's the low rate, but just how comfortable you're going for the high rate. It is based on the product rates, but just making sure that we're within your sprayer's capabilities and logistically for getting water. I know that filling can be a pain. So just making sure that we're all on the same page with water rate. As well, type of prescription. Do you know you just want an on-off or maybe just a low-high because you're not comfortable shutting it off anywhere? That's fine. If you don't have that decided too, that's what we're here for. We can figure it out. But if you already have a picture in your head of what you want, definitely let us know. As well, something that's optional, but I do recommend if you have a cost per acre of your product from your retail or whoever you bought it from, you can also give that value to us as well, and we can enter it in because then it'll actually give you a cost breakdown for each zone and across the field. And that'll show up on those as prescribed maps that I was talking about, those PDF maps. So yeah, if you're interested in seeing that, never hurts, and we can add that on there as well.
Wow. That'd be pretty cool, especially kind of from the cost basis as well. So
yes, especially when we're dealing with these products because regular in particular can be pretty expensive, and it's just another pass across the field, right? So we want to count for it.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you've done a really great job talking about, all sorts of desiccants and how we use them and when we use them. But do you have any closing thoughts that you want to share with our audience here today before we sign off?
Yeah, for sure. I would say biggest thing is there's lots of resources out there that are available to you to help with these decisions, whether that be spray timing or even just what products you want to use. So the main ones that I gravitate towards are your crop protection guide, because it's going to have information about what products are available and which crops they're registered on. So that's a good place to start. Obviously, your retail is another good place to check, because you want to see what products are actually going to be available to you in your region. And I do know there has been some concerns with different products availability and stuff. So knowing what you can actually get your hands on is important. And lastly, I did talk about residue limits, or not residue limits, but making sure we don't have residue in our seeds, like at the end of the day. So there is a website called keepitclean.ca, and it has information about that, and different things around managing these pre-harvest applications. And there's also some really good staging guides on there, so with pictures. So bonus. But those are the three that I would gravitate towards. And if you have questions, just ask, because it's a new thing, right? So
Totally. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining us here today again with all your amazing knowledge and things like that. And I really hope some people are able to use this on their farm, because I think it's a great new way to kind of utilize VR and save on inputs. So
for sure.
all right. Thanks so much, Skye. Take care.
Thanks. You too.
Bye.
Bye.